travel to Greenland today, you'll find a community thriving on the abundance of natural resources such as fish, crops, and precious metals like uranium, copper, iron, and rubies. It would be almost impossible to tell that the people of this land, agricultural methods, and much of the culture originated from the Vikings. The ethnically Scandinavian people living independently between 790 AD to 1066 AD, whose revolutionary shipbuilding, agricultural techniques, and their will to expand shaped the North Atlantic, and whose influence is still felt today. During this documentary, we will explore the legendary voyage, establishment, and sustainability of the Viking settlement on Greenland, focusing mainly on the role of the main orchestrator of the Viking settlement on Greenland, Erik the Red, and how his contribution to the settlement shaped culture, technologies, and whose impact is still felt today.
Erik the Red is the pure reason for a Viking settlement in Greenland, as despite Iceland knowing about Greenland, they were prevented from settling it until Erik the Red. In 1877, an Icelandic settler named Gunnarborn Olfsson was driven by a storm to Greenland. However, did not land there, but instead continued on his journey. It was Erik the Red who enabled the Viking settlement of Greenland, as he was the first to attempt a settlement. The Greenland sagas reveal in vivid detail that he encountered numerous obstacles on his journey to Greenland. During the summer of around 985 AD, Erik the Red set out with 25 ships headed for Greenland. Despite 11 of these falling victim to the Denmark Strait, 14 ships made it across, which was crucial for the settlement of Greenland. This is due to the strong, cold current from the north, which in summer brings down a constant stream of pack ice and frequent icebergs. The danger of the strait is evident, if even a seafaring people like the Vikings wouldn't attempt to cross it. It was Erik's daring plan to cross the Denmark Strait that is the single reason for a Viking settlement in Greenland. The Mariners Museum suggests that the Vikings would have seen and known about Greenland, but the Denmark Strait prevented them from colonizing until Erik the Red.
This settlement of Greenland was incredibly important for the Vikings, as Iceland was out of space after a century of Viking settlement. However, Erik the Red was faced with the difficulties of Greenland's harsh and inhospitable environment, on which he would have to produce adequate food supplies for the sustainability of the population. Furthermore, despite never seeing an average temperature above 10 degrees in summer, Erik was still expected to produce surplus goods for trade for other necessities, such as walrus tusks.
Erik the Red enabled Greenland's survival by transforming Greenland into the main ivory exporter in Western Europe, a near monopoly even. At the time, walrus ivory was incredibly valuable. A document from 1327 CE showed that a load of walrus ivory, equivalent to 520 tusks, was enough to pay 6 years' worth of Greenland's taxes to their ruler, the King of Norway. That much walrus ivory had the same value as 780 cows or 60 tons of fish. So despite the myth that Greenland was named to attract farmers, this is probably not the case, as most of the money to be made in Greenland was in walrus ivory. All the walrus ivory was incredibly useful to the Vikings. The change in the ivory trade coincides with the flourishing of the Norse settlements on Greenland. The populations grew and elaborate churches were constructed. Later Icelandic accounts suggest that in the 1120s, Greenlanders used walrus ivory to secure their right to their own bishopric from the King of Norway. Tusks were also used to pay tithes to the church. Erik the Red's opportunistic idea to harvest walrus ivory could have been the leading cause for Greenland's survival. The most significant part of Erik's Greenland settlement was that it would go on to last up until the mid-15th century, outlasting the Vikings themselves. The Vikings themselves had assimilated with the Anglo-Saxons, and their culture had been lost as they adopted a new one. But Greenland, being both politically and geographically isolated from the mainstream Vikings, was able to maintain its own culture. Despite Greenland adopting Christianity under Erik's son, Leif Erikson, Greenland's harsh environment discouraged migration, so Greenland was able to remain ethnically Viking. The settlement also enabled the Vikings to further maintain their influence in the North Atlantic. Erik divided the land into two settlements, Estribigo and Vestribigo, with Erik chieftain. Estribigo prospered, amassing to a total of 400 farms. The excess food and livestock enabled population growth from an estimated 400 inhabitants up to 5,000. Erik's infrastructure, including a great hall and cathedral, were essential components to the survival of the Greenland settlement.
It is highly likely that without Erik the Red, a Greenland settlement would have been short-lived, if not entirely non-existent. The impact that he had on both Viking and modern culture will be felt forever.